everybody, welcome to Dr. Chi's Salon. I've been away for a while because I've had to focus on my mental health, my physical health, as someone living with an autoimmune illness, in addition to just trying to make friends in real life in real time. So it's caused me to be away from my microphone. I had to touch grass for a bit, and I hope that you'll forgive me. And if not, I'm so sorry. There's not much I can do about that. So today I bring you an interview that I did back in February with a fellow fighting Illini, Dr. Antonio Rueda. He's a sociolinguist who has done research on the presence of Africans in early modern Spanish literature. That's fancy talk to say that he has looked at the work of playwrights from Spain to understand how they were perceiving Africans and how that is revealed in the ways that they talk and display Africans in their plays. So the interesting thing about his work is that he's not doing this from a literature perspective. He takes a social scientific, sociolinguistic approach to his work. I came across this piece as I was trying to understand the experiences of Africans in relationship to language and how other people are perceiving them as it pertains to language. I thought this piece was really interesting, and I actually had my students read it for one of my classes this past fall. It was a reading that sparked some really interesting discussions that I bring up in the interview. Now, there's a couple of moments where I geek out with Dr. Rueda, and forgive me for that, because I am a geek. I just think that what he's telling us about is really fascinating, and it's an area of study that needs more research. For example, he talks about the first Catholic Brotherhood in Spain and how it was founded by Africans long before the transatlantic slave trade. So we need to do more research on Africans and their descendants in Spain, both before and during and after the transatlantic slave trade. So I think his work is really interesting because he takes literature seriously. He also takes linguistics seriously. And he's really interested in the experiences of minoritized peoples and their languages and that presence in literature. One other thing that I have to bring up is that if you're watching the video recording of this interview, you'll see my eyebrows do some really funny things. And it's because I did not know that the whole time I was talking, having this highly intellectual discussion with Dr. Rueda, I had my Zoom eyebrows on, and they're doing some funky stuff that I've never seen them do before. So it looks super, super crazy, but I hope that you enjoy it if you're watching the video. But if you're listening to the audio, then you don't get that pleasure and privilege of watching my eyebrows or fake eyebrows in action. So let me now present to you Dr. Antonio Rueda, talking about his piece called From Bozal to Mulata. So tell us a bit more about yourself. What's your background? So you did your PhD, and then where are you? How did you end up where you are?
Yes, well, I started in Spain. I did my bachelor's degree in Spain, in Seville, close to Granada, in the south. Yeah, so I became interested in the study of linguistics, but also linguistics applied to minorities, especially when I was particularly a boy, a teenager, when in 1992, when the Universal Exposition was celebrated in Seville, in my hometown.
Oh, okay.
Well, it was to commemorate the 500-year anniversary, right, of the arrival of the Europeans or Spanish or Columbus, in America, in the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
So I found out many things that I didn't know. For example, many Native Americans came to Seville and to complain about the treatment that they had received during these 5 centuries. And that was something that I had never heard of, right, in Spain, or in school, for example. So found it fascinating. So I started doing some research. The research you could do as a teenager. When this interest started, I joined other minorities to my linguistic and literary analysis, especially considering that not only in Spain, but especially in Seville, was the center of multiple minorities. It was were the most important community of Jewish people, and in the 15th century, for example, before they were expelled, in 1492 by the Catholic kings, and also Muslims, who built the most important symbol in Seville, the tower, of the mosque that was destroyed, and then a cathedral was built. And finally, my own community, the Roma people in Andalusia and in Seville, I started doing research on them. So that's what I am now. No, I'm sort of a researcher, no, or of how this making of racial formation started in the late medieval and early modern period started, and how this also is useful to analyze what is happening today, in the 20th and 21st century in racial relations, all over the world, not only in early modern Spanish literature.
So I invited you here to talk about your piece From Bozal to Mulata, a sociolinguistic analysis of the Black African female slave in early modern Spanish theater. That was published in Critical Multilingualism Studies. So my students read this piece and we had some questions for you.
Okay,
so
great.
we were reading about like these plays and how these playwrights are talking about Africans in Spain and especially African women. And so we tried to come up with what we thought was your main argument in this piece. I thought they did a good job, but I want to run it by you. We thought that your main argument is that through the analysis of plays, we can see how Spaniards saw blacks or Africans, particularly Black women,
yes,
and how they saw them as other, as less than, and deficient in comparison to whites or to Spaniards in Renaissance Spain.
Yeah, that is correct. I mean, as I defend, no, in the article, there is a development, right, of that that representation, but it's definitely what happens in the first century, no, of when literary Afro-diasporic people were included in Spanish literature or Portuguese literature.
Why are these playwrights writing about Black Africans like in 1500s and 1600s Spain? Like, what was going on?
Well, first, this started when the slave trade began, right, in the 15th century. The Iberian slave trade first was with the Portuguese. No, the Portuguese started to circumnavigate the African coast, 1430s, 1440s, and then when they arrived there, they found that there was a flourishing trade of slavery, right? There were the different groups, the different clans, no, the different regions had enslaved people from other regions, not from other clans. No, so at the beginning, they were not looking for slaves to bring to the Iberian Peninsula. They were mostly looking for gold, no, right, and ivory was the most important elements that they were looking for. But since they realized that slavery was a very common phenomenon there, and it was very easy, right, to have slaves and to buy slaves or to exchange them with these African regions with guns or gunpowder. And also Iberians were used to slavery, no, because there was already there were many slaves, especially in the south, that had been brought from Africa, from northern and other parts of Africa, by the Arabs, right? But who lived in these Muslim kingdoms, and they also stayed when the kingdoms were conquered by the Christians, no? Right, so they were used to that. It wasn't slavery was not new, no, especially Black African slavery, no, or Northern African slavery was not new to them. So then they began to bring slaves to the peninsula, first to Portugal, Lisbon, Évora as well, and then in the late 15th century, there were hundreds of Black slaves in the Iberian Peninsula. Although there were already a large community of slaves, for example, in Seville, in Sevilla, when the first confraternity of exclusively Black people, Black members, were founded there in the 1390s. No, so that means that there were an important community of Black people in Seville before this slave trade started in the 15th century. Right. So
you're saying that in the 1300s, there were organizations of Africans in Seville?
In 1390s, the first Catholic Christian confraternity, exclusively with Blacks, was founded in Seville. Yes, and it still exists. It's one of the oldest ones in the Holy Week. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. I don't remember learning that when I was taking my Islam in, Spain class,
Ah,
but you
well.
know what? It's been many, many years. So
Mhm.
I learned stuff and I forgot
No, no, but
it.
maybe they didn't even mention it. They didn't
Cover
even
it.
know it. It's not something that we talk about much. No, I mean it's a more I mean it's more known in Seville, no, and due to the Holy Week. No, when they talk
Mhm.
about the different confraternities, they say, okay, and this is the one who was that was founded. I remember when it was the 600th anniversary, when I was just a little
Wow.
boy, and
Yeah.
it is, yeah.
So if it's the 600th anniversary, that's before the 1400s.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Interesting.
So, but there were not black characters included in literature, in Spanish literature, until the 16th century, right? When the Portuguese started to include uh, some African characters, especially African noble people who came to Portugal to talk about how superior the king of Portugal was compared to the African kings, right? So there was that acceptance, no, that at least literary acceptance of superiority. It was.
So this isn't something that actually happened. This is
Mhm.
like Portuguese people or Spanish people writing about
Yeah.
an imagined African nobleman coming
Mhm.
and like, doing the whole thing to the,
Kneeling, you're right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
accepting not their inferiority. Yeah, and they're and saying that they were ready, for this acculturation, right? For this acculturation process, which
interesting.
involved especially religion, Christianity and Catholicism later, and then this came to Spain. So Spaniards, the first Spanish authors who included Afro diasporic characters and was following the Portuguese models.
But one of the questions that my students had was who was portraying these Africans in these plays? Because, these playwrights are writing plays to be performed. Were
Mm-hmm,
these actors performing in blackface or
mm-hmm.
were they getting actual Africans to portray these characters?
Some of them, but the norm was to have white characters, white actors or actresses with blackface. Yeah, that was the most common thing. But there were some black actors and actresses
Oh,
who played,
really?
who played especially the minor roles, right?
Oh, do you
Mhm.
know, do they like actually have the names of those actors? Like, is that like
No,
archived or are these like
no,
people who are just in passing?
no, we don't have that because we don't have many names of actors and actresses from the 16th century
Mhm.
when this happened. But it was mentioned, no, in the list, no, in the documents, no, there was that the person playing this character was a black person, right? Or a
Oh.
mulatto person, or a mulatto character. No, not a mulatto character, it's a person um, who could already speak Spanish, right? Because it was the linguistic distinction, right, between those who couldn't speak Spanish, who were, of course, not part of this of theater, right? So we had black people or white people, but it was especially striking, not because you have to imagine a black Spanish person playing a black character, but um, speaking as the literary author decided, right? So they had to change to modify completely, their normal way of speaking, which is common in theater, but here was particularly striking, to everyone. No, I mean, at least now, from a point of view now.
It's funny because you talked about this idea of like assimilating into Spanish life and culturation or assimilation.
Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems as though you're saying that like these Bozales, these people who are like migrating, who recently arrived in the Iberian Peninsula, are people who are not yet familiar with Spanish or Portuguese. Like they hadn't had
Mhm.
encounters like that, right?
Yes.
And so I've heard this term Ladino
Mhm.
used. And so could Ladinos be people who were born in Africa, but who like became Christianized or converted and spoke the language, or were they still seen as Bozales?
If they had been living in Spain for a number of years, they could be considered Ladino, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yes, but it had to be a very not a very old person, but a person who they knew, had been living there or had other masters, right, before. So when because slaves were also bought and sold in Spain, right, not only
Mm-hmm.
from Africa, no. So there was this trade also in the Iberian Peninsula. So they could mention in the document, no, that if it was Ladino because this slave had been serving, no, for a number of years with another person, no.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, but most of the Ladinos were Spaniards, no, or people who had been born in Spain. Right?
Ah. And would these have been mulattoes included in that category, or would it have been like two
No,
African parents having a child there?
you mean Ladino?
The Ladino.
La- Ladino could be also African with African parents born in Spain.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
Got you.
Ladino had, I mean, it was just a person who could speak Spanish, as a native speaker. No, that was
Mhm.
basically the definition. No, a person who had been, assimilated a culture, baptized, and everything. No, so yes, they didn't actually many Ladinos. Possibly the most famous one in the 16th century. I don't mention in the article because it was focused on women, but it's Juan Latino, who was Latino comes from Ladino, right? It was the first black professor in Europe, no? In the 16th century. It was a professor from the University of Granada, actually.
No way.
Yeah, Juan Latino,
One
professor
Latino.
of theology, and in the second half of the 16th century. And he took that name Latino because he considered himself, at the same level as white professors, no. So in order to prove that, he wrote in Latin, right, to say I can not only speak Spanish but also Latin, no. So that's why he took that surname, no.
And so you talk also about the mulattoes, and you talk about like women specifically in the
Mhm,
piece.
mhm. Yeah.
And there's a lot of interesting things that are happening with the women. Can you tell us a little bit about like what your findings are as far as African women in these plays by these Spanish authors?
You mean with mulatto characters?
Well, mulattoes and with African women, both.
African, yes. Well, there is definitely a change, no, in the 17th century in the representation of African women, no, or Afro-diasporic, no, because many, for example, in the play, I talk about one character who was born in Latin America, no, who was
Right.
right. So there is that diaspora coming not only from Africa but also from Latin America, right? And there was this feeling of superiority in as compared to black characters, no. And there was always specified in all of the plays, no. Maybe not in because in theater, for example, we have the list of characters right at the beginning, no, as it happens today,
Mhm.
and they said black, no, or mulatto or mulata. And if they didn't say that, if they didn't specify if what was the specific characteristic of that slave, they could say just slave, no, esclavo, esclava. But in the play, during the conversations, you could see that they always make references to the color, no, to the level of color, no, because there was a long list of categories, no, for Afro-diasporic people, no, not only black or mulatto, no, there was also comparisons to queens, no, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Queens is a typical
Oh,
dessert in
quince, yes.
quince, no, right?
The
Membrillo.
fruit?
Yeah, the fruit, the sweetie fruit, yes,
Oh.
that depending on the level of cooking, no, the quince becomes darker, right? And they use
Oh.
that to
Like membrillo?
membrillo, yeah.
Huh. Yeah, because it's brown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So they use it, to categorize the skin, no, of the slaves.
Wow. I'm like, mind blown.
It was a very
Got
long,
it.
long list of categories. So yes, and sometimes it's when you study the documents, it's not easy because I remember a description of a slave that said she is as white as a mulata, but of gypsy origin. Well, that was the description.
Oh.
What do you say of that? Maybe just she was just a gypsy or Roman,
Right.
because
What does
white
that
as a
mean?
mulata. So
Interesting.
yeah, so that was part of the whole conversation, no? And also the idea that um, this process that was going on that started in the 17th century, no, in the early 17th century, when these priests, especially in Seville, no, because Seville had this role of connection with the Americas, right? Many of these slaves were brought to Seville and then taken to the Americas, right? So you had this preoccupation by the church in Seville about these slaves that needed to be baptized, right? But many of these slaves that were brought from Africa didn't speak any Spanish, right? So how did they have to do this? So they wrote this manual, no, that I mentioned in the article about the different steps, no, that they could follow, no, in order to ensure that these Bozales or Bozal slaves or slaves who couldn't speak any Spanish were baptized properly and also understood what was saying, right? And so that they use Ladino slaves and all that, no? So
To
there was
translate? Or
yeah,
is that what they
yeah.
were doing?
They use Ladino slaves to translate to these people, no? Mhm.
Hmm. It
So
seems
the,
as, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry. So there was a large knowledge about not only of these categories, but also about the origins of the slaves and also of the languages, no, that they spoke, no, because there were six major African languages, and they were very different, no, in each other, not to each other. So they knew that, no, so they knew what translator to use, no, in order to ensure the proper translation and the proper baptism process.
It seems as though you're like reading your text, you're saying that not only were the playwrights using like language, we don't know for sure whether Africans actually spoke like this, right? But
Mhm.
that they were doing it in a way to let the audience know, oh, this person is speaking this bad Spanish, this Africanized Spanish.
Mhm.
But that it
Mhm.
was, they were often like, it was often used to like as for comedy. Is that right?
Mhm.
Or like,
Most of the times, yeah.
okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was thinking. I was thinking about the case where the priest was talking to this woman about like, okay, let's now do the Lord's Prayer,
Mhm. Mhm.
and the person's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
he's like, oh, these guys don't even know the Lord's Prayer. Like, how can you? They just baptize you, and you don't know anything about Christianity, right? So,
Mhm.
and I thought, and it seems to me like that probably was a moment of like humor for the
Yeah.
audience.
I mean, in most of the interactions where African people intervened was with the goal of making people, the audience, laugh, with them, with their answers, with their questions, with their actions, because they always misinterpreted, what was going on, or what they had to do. No, so it was certainly that was the point. And even in the 17th century, we had mulatto characters who also create these funny scenes, but the difference is that they make fun at white people. No, in the 17th century,
Oh,
no, there is
really?
this change. No, they are more intelligent, right? Because they can speak Spanish, and they are not black. No, their tonality is wider. No, is lighter than the black slaves, because that's something that I have found out. No, reading hundreds of these plays, is that there are no characters who are defined as black characters in the play who can speak Spanish as a native speaker, right? Only mulatto slaves can speak Spanish, not as a native speaker. So that's a major distinction between them.
And you're saying that the mulattoes were used to make fun of whites
Yeah,
in the plays?
yeah. And
How did they do that?
well, like
What was the reason?
answering to their comments, no, or reacting to when they were mocked. No, they answer even mocking the white character.
Wow,
Yeah, and
interesting.
there
So almost
were
like resistance there
yeah,
happening.
exactly. No, it's a whole new level, no, in the 17th century, but only with mulatto characters, no mulatto, mulatas, no with black characters, because they're not able to uh, to um, to respond, no, at a level that we all can understand, no, it's not a very complex language, no, that they can use, no, because they're not they're
They're
the
not
intention,
native speakers.
yeah, the intention of the authors was not to use these characters, not to interact at a very complex level, no, they just have to a funny role, no, most of the times, no? But in the 17th centuries, we have Afro-diasporic characters who are able to not only to react to these jokes with another joke, but also to intervene in the action in a way that they are very important for the goal of the white characters. No? So, for example, in love relations, no, or when there are many plays in which women dress as men, for example. No, that's a very common trope in early modern theater, or also as another ethnicities, no, as gypsy, for example, and they always have a mulatto slave to help them. No, most of the time, women, no, mulata. So yeah, they have a very important role in the we can say in the development of the story. No?
Yeah. So use a bunch of linguistic terms. For
Mm-hmm,
example,
mm-hmm,
yeísmo,
mm-hmm,
when
mm-hmm.
the double L or eye sound becomes like a j sound,
Yeah.
like the word calle can become calle antes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked about rhoticism,
Mm-hmm,
where the L and the R get mixed up.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think there was a word like diablo for
Mm-hmm.
diablo, like
Yeah.
meaning devil. And
Mm-hmm.
they also talk about mixing B's and V's. So
Yeah.
somebody talk about voy a like rabar versus lavar platos
Mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
something, or pratos.
Yeah.
And lastly, the loss of the final S.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the linguistic terms for those latter two changes or I guess traits.
Mm-hmm.
Like instead of saying I don't know, calles, it would be calle, like
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
lo calle for like
Local, yeah,
multiple
yeah.
streets.
Because it also makes the gender, right, of the
Ah, that's right.
mm-hmm.
Okay, the gender swapping,
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that I get tripped up on all the time. Like I
Yeah, that's
we don't do that in English,
yeah, exactly. It's
like
easier
a
in
street
English
does
with
not
that.
have a gender,
Mhm. Yeah, in English we have this he's, her, right?
Uh-huh.
That changes. That doesn't change in Spanish, no, for example, no. So I get mixed
Yeah.
up frequently.
And my parents do this all the time in Igbo, or like they speak Igbo as a native language, and then when they're speaking
Mhm.
English, sometimes they'll switch the genders of the people that they're talking about. They'll say he when they're talking about a she, or a she when they mean a he, because
Mhm.
Igbo language does not gender people like that.
Uh-huh.
Like
I see. I
thing.
see. Yeah, man, that's
Um,
normal. Yeah.
so one of my students asked, like, we were reading about them. They were like, so when I was reading the piece, I was seeing people here in the United States who are Latino or Latine, like do some of those things. And they're like, is this where it comes from? Is it from, Africans? Is it something else that's happening? And my response was, I think it's, the presence of African influence on the forms of Spanish that people are speaking. Or is there like nuance to that we should understand? Like, what are your thoughts?
No, I mean this changes started in the 16th century. No? All of these changes. There is a mixture. Yes, there is a strong African influence, but also the interaction between African people in the 16th century and 17th century, and also Andalusian Spanish, no? Especially
in Seville, where most of these people interacted, had their interactions, and that was brought to the Americas, right? Especially to the, I'm sure that your students were talking about people from the Caribbean, right? Which was where the large majority of slaves were transported, right, from Spain, and also it's a very similar dialect to southern Spain, not to Andalusian Spanish, especially southwestern Spain. So yes, there's definitely a mixture of all of this, all of these people, and also many words, that come from African languages that came to the Caribbean Spanish. Like chévere, for example, it's a very common word in Caribbean Spanish, not to talk about something great, something very good. It's used in many foods, especially with the types of food with the ch, the ch sound, ch. They'll most of them come from African languages, so they are common in southern Spain, especially where the Seville and Cadiz, which was the two main centers, of connection with the Americas, and also of slavery until the 18th century, and also in these Caribbean countries, which was obviously the strongest influence, right, of African languages, because a very similar thing happened, in these countries, in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries, until the late 19th century, when slavery was forbidden, was abolished in Cuba, was the last country. In 1880 something, a few years after the US.
In Spanish America, but Brazil was 1888. It was the last country in the Western
Oh,
Hemisphere.
yeah, I was talking about Spanish
I just
speaking.
wanted to because I like to put in those Brazilians. I'm also Brazilianist. I'm like, don't forget.
I see. Yeah. All these characteristics that affected the development of Spanish, because the Spanish in 17th century Spanish underwent many profound changes. That's why, for example, in the 17th century, we have the first monolingual dictionary, in Spanish, where that you can consult, for example, to see what white people thought about many of these words. You can see words like Bozal, Ladino, very, very interesting definitions, right? For example, in Bozal, they say that it's someone who can only speak the wrong African language, someone who can only speak his or her own African language. So they were aware that there were African languages, that, I mean, of course, and that slaves could speak a language properly, right? So they were aware of that, but that wasn't enough not to consider them civilized people. The civilization was based on acculturation, and this assimilation process was successful only when the language and the religion were assimilated, right?
But also some level to which, like, you have to physically become assimilated, in the sense that Africans aren't likely to experience that, but their descendants might if they were racially mixed.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, no, the mix was very important, not to be considered an assimilated person. In the 17th century is when the mulatto people are added to literature, is when we see that assimilation is being accepted, is part of Spanish culture, at least because they're getting closer also to the Spanish mainstream culture, which was obviously white. And this doesn't only affect Afro-diasporic people, but also the Romani people. You see, they say similar things about them in literature and documents, and also in philosophical treatises in the 17th century. So they follow a very similar process. The difference that they come from Egypt, although they don't come from Egypt, but that's what they thought. They were called Egyptians, Gypsy, Gitano.
But that's where the term comes from
yes, exactly.
Egipto, like
and Gypsy too, Egyptian, Gypsy.
Right. And we know that we don't use that word in English now. We refer to them as the Roma people.
No, of course. But I mean, in the 17th century, it wasn't known yet that they come from Asia,
India?
from India.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got you. Did you mention that you're a member of the Roma community, or did I misunderstand that?
Yes.
Okay, very cool. Like I remember like I really like flamenco, and I remember like going when I was in Spain. Me and my friend Yang were like, we're gonna take flamenco classes. We were terrible. We didn't know that you have to study it for years to get good, right? And we're like, we're gonna take flamenco classes. We're gonna do our thing, you know. And then our teacher was like, do you mean you want to learn Sevillanos or Sevillanos? I can't remember how you say it.
Sevillanos.
And we're like, no, we don't want to learn Sevillanos. We want to learn flamenco.
The whole
we were
thing.
so stupid. We're so dumb. We were there for like 3 months. Like, we're not going to learn flamenco.
Yeah. Most tourists or foreigners learn Sevillanas, no, which was just one, what we call palo, no, one dance, specific dance. But there are many different dances, no, and ways of singing flamenco, no, and also playing the guitar. So there are many differences between them.
I remember thinking, oh, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say that Sevillanas is the most common one for not only for non-Spanish people, but also for Spanish people, because it was most people dance in the ferias, no, in these fairs, no, public fairs. So that's what they dance. No, then not many people in Spain know how to dance flamenco very well.
Right, of course.
It's not just you, no, and your friend.
Yeah. It's like expecting all Black people to know how to tap dance or something. It's like, no,
it's like a very like Romani people. Not all Romani people know how to dance flamenco.
Of course. No, I just remember like thinking this poor woman, like she was a Roma woman, and she lived in the Albaicin, I think it was called, in Granada. Yeah. And like she lived in a cave, and it was like amazing. Like we'd only heard in books about people living like that. It's like, oh, it's a nice little house. Cool house, taking our classes. I was like, oh, that poor woman. She's probably like, oh, these girls don't know what they're talking about, but hey, just give me the money, you know? Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. Did you have any questions for me, or like, is there anything else that you'd like to like share that you didn't share earlier?
No, I just wanted to mention that it's what I'm doing now. What I did in the article is something that needs this type of research needs a lot more research, no, because it is not common to have literature people adding linguistics, no, to the literary analysis, no, or linguists adding literature, no, or at least a complex analysis of literature, no. So it's something, this association of linguistics and literature is something that needs a lot more research and depth. And also about what happened to all these African slaves, no, in Spain after the 18th century, no, because there's not much research about them. Because what they used to say is that all they mixed, no, with white people, so their color disappeared, no, or they went to the Americas, right? But there's not something specific about it. No, there are no studies about the development, no, of African slavery in Spain, no, or in the Iberian Peninsula.
Interesting. I'm like, they became like my host sister. That would be an easy response, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that happened to many of them. No?
Thank you for listening to this interview with Dr. Antonio Rueda. You know, it's really hard to do a podcast because you never know if people actually like what you have to say, if people have thoughts or questions or ideas that they want to share. So tell me, what did you think about everything that we talked about today? Did you know about how Africans were depicted in European literature? Were you surprised by the different labels that were used for people who were Africans who spoke Spanish versus those who did not? Or were you surprised by other things that we talked about? Let me know in the comments or leave me a message. I hope to hear from you soon. Thanks for coming to Dr. G's Salon.